This notion of mutual learning is probably the most important part, I think, of community. And how those conditions of mutual learning are nurtured is really much more important than the vision or the agreement or the intention or the mission or the model or the.
So also different assumptions. In the analysis of how the system has messed us up, in a sense, is also important here. So in our analysis, the system that is not working has kept us tied and addicted to its promises and comforts. So here we have an indigenous colleague that says that if colonialism was not delicious, it would have been interrupted a long time ago. So we hardly bidinally, neurobiologically attached. Our comforts and enjoyments are attached to what the system promises and provides.
You also have passengers that are toddlers, that are incredibly immature. And modernity rewards these passengers when they take the wheel and encourages them to take the wheel. But what we want to call is, when we're trying to have more sober and mature conversations, is not only to bring the attention perhaps to those passengers that could be elders in that bus, but also to hold all that interaction with a psychoanalytic distance. So to observe those relationships and those complexities that are happening within ourselves so that we can hold that. Because ultimately, if we can't hold the complexity within, there's no way we're going to be able to hold the complexity without.
How do we allow for what's possible in the whole realm of communication to change? And that in itself is mutual learning. So I just made a shift with you here. So usually we would think about how to make a model, how to figure out who does what are the roles, to create the perfect sort of solution for how to do this. And I would say, on the whole, that that's kind of colonial thinking. That is mechanized thinking. That is the kind of thinking that is going to be a disappointment, to put it mildly, because people won't keep up with their roles. They won't keep believing in their roles. People will learn and grow and change. And when people learn and grow and change together, they start to bump into each other.
And see what direction they are going, especially in terms of responsibility, accountability for healing and collective healing, and trying to translate the direction into something that can land here. But a lot of what we learned there, we call, it's a non-Western form of psychoanalysis, because Western psychoanalysis is usually based on language of the body, the human body, or human archetypes, even if it's collective. And their psychoanalysis is based on the land. It's the land that is alive and conscious and communicating in languages that we don't necessarily understand.
See, this is a house that is on a planet and is very close to exceeding the limits of the planet. So the floor of this house is the floor of separability. This has to do with the illusion or the duality of humans and nature. We like to think of ourselves as separate from nature, but in fact, we are nature, and there's only an illusion of separation that mobilizes or materializes the floor of this house, the foundation of this house.
People got hurt. It wasn't safe. But nothing is safe, actually. Particularly not culture change. It's not safe. And the other thing that's even more not safe is not making the space for culture change.
And the tensions. And so in our collective, there's a very strong tension about like the commitment to the complicity in harm, for example, right? The idea that even our artistic experiments are reproducing harm, like systemically, historically, but sometimes even directly.
Part of. But when we fall into the spell or the illusion of separation, then we have to, for us to feel worthy or feel that we belong, we have to start producing in modernity's economies. We start to produce value in modernity's economies to then feel like we belong or feel like we're worthy. And this is one of those violent mechanisms that these foundations of the house, that enable the foundation of the house to be what it is, really. And these hierarchies not only happen between humans and nature, but it also happens between humans and humans.
We don't actually know how to be in communal relationships. There is an attempt at trying to figure that out. Should we make a chore wheel? Should we assign various tasks to different people? And if we make the chore wheel, what does that actually do? What is that a replacement for? And part of what that's a replacement for is actually having the perception of what needs to get done and the way in which we are holding ourselves together in that moment, okay? If we have to have a chore wheel, it's because we can't actually respond to each other's complexity in the moment.
The system is also limited in the ways it conditions us to see, feel, relate, desire, heal, and imagine. So the boundaries of the system are very limiting in terms of how we perceive reality, but how we perceive our entitlements as well. In these two perceptions, the perception of reality, and as Nora was saying, the perception of perception, and the perception of our perceived entitlements keeps us in the merry-go-round.
Now we need each other, okay, to do what needs to be done, to live in the way that we need to be able to live in the coming decades. We actually can't do it alone. It's actually not possible. There is not, my kids are not going to go out in the world and go get a job and buy an apartment and live as individual professionals. That moment is past. So how now in this moment do we begin to think about what is the communication that makes it possible to keep those relationships in vitality and alive?
Objective claims, it is also making universal, or when it makes objective universal and neutral claims of its knowledge, what it is also doing is that it's eliminating other ways of knowing. And therefore it is also delegitimizing other ways of being, which ultimately ends up in genocide, really, and ecocide. So De Sousa Santos will call this epistemicide. So the genocide or the elimination of other epistemology. So in here we see Western science, for example, or the single stories of development or of progress that we know have been incredibly dangerous historically.
Things that goes wrong is that there's a back door. And for the most part, people who are exploring with communal living and collaborative process are doing so out of choice. It's a pretty privileged group, right? And especially with intentional communities. And so there is this sense of, I'm going to do this as long as it feels good to me. And when it stops feeling good to me, I'm out. And that is not going to make it possible to shift the communication in the way that it needs to shift. Community is like an ecology. And if a community is like an ecology, then every communication and relationship that's happening in that community shifts as the other ones shift. It's not like you can just change one and fix one part, eliminate one person off the island, sort of thing, or fix one person, or pathologize one person. What's happening is happening in the ecology of relationship.